everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anarita Bashalieva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Shrey. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any question for our guest. A quick greeting to our viewers in Ukraine from Dr. Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким покліном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you, Katerina. Today's guest will be introduced by Professor Victor Fett.
Thank you, Anara. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Ukrainian historian Dr. Yaroslav Hrytsak. Dr. Hrytsak is Doctor of Historical Sciences and Professor of the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, and also the Director of the Institute for Historical Studies of Franko National University of Lviv. This is week 198 of MUkraine podcast on Fridays from Marshall University, West Virginia. Dr. Hrytsak, microphone is yours. We're honored to have you.
Thank you so much. The honor is mine. I feel very honored to be invited by your team, and especially my personal thanks to the Dr. Victor Fett for inviting me. So without further ado, let me proceed to topic, which I suggest for this discussion. And the topic will be based on the very recent surveys that I get access on Ukrainian public opinion, public mood, which I believe is very important. But let me start with a kind of reminder that some 20 years ago or so, a late professor, Harvard professor, Richard Pipes, I bet that for many this name is very familiar. He was a leading specialist on Russia, on the Soviet Union, and he was also advisor to President Carter. He was responsible for shaping the Soviet politics at that time. He was very much a respectable scholar, has had many books. He was a leading specialist. To put long story short, in 2004, he published an article with a very telling title, What Russians Want and Think. He was referring or rephrasing the title of the famous Hollywood movie comedy, What Women Wants, but basically his aim was very serious. And he was trying to analyze the mood of the Russian society with a special focus. Because you may remember or not, but that time, Putin was already on his 5th year of power in Kremlin. And there was a lot of speculation that this Putin's power was manipulated by ruling elites, particularly by those close milieu of Yeltsin and Berezovsky. You may remember that. So basically, he came with a quite different conclusion, because basically says that not it's just Russian had been manipulated. It's much worse. Russian wanted to be manipulated. They were open to manipulation because they expected somebody like Putin come to power. Basically, put long story short, what he found out in his analysis of the surveys, that Russians didn't care about democracy. Only one in 10 person in Russia believes that democracy is important for their country. The rest, which is 90%, they believe that democracy is a ruse, which is kind of the invention which couldn't work in Russia. They feel entrenched, they feel endangered by the enemies around, and they want a hard hand to come and to establish a rule, establish an order, and to rule the country. So basically, Russia was yearning for somebody like Putin. I wonder what would be if these results of the pipe analysis will be taken seriously by the Western experts and Western politicians already there. Just let me remind, it was 2004. Let me remind you, it was year of the Ukrainian Euromaidan. It was 3 years before the famous, or as infamous, Putin talk in Munich, when he reveals his plan. So basically, we may speculate what would happen if the Western politicians took this kind of the warning seriously. We could also speculate whether what Russians feel now about Putin and what they feel about war. What we know, that some kind of the estimations or hypotheses that many Russians are tired of the war. They want the war to finish, and they don't believe that much in Putin. But that's all speculation. And I would say it doesn't matter that much, because Putin did everything to erase the kind of the agency of Russians. What Russians think doesn't really matter. What Russians think doesn't really matter anymore. This is already the history that is done. What matters much what Ukrainians think, because unlike in Russia, in Ukraine, public opinion matters a lot, so to say. Again, as we say, Ukraine is not Russia and Zelensky is not Putin. Zelensky is very much dependent on the public opinion. He checks it every time. The reason why I'm telling that, because basically nowadays, since we're discussing the possibility or the chances for the Ukrainian-Russian truce or peace, so to say, there is a kind of speculation that a lot depends on Zelensky himself. Yes, it is, but only to a certain extent, because what I'm saying here is not about Zelensky, it's about Ukrainian society. Because all decisions that Zelensky made is very much taken account with the attention on Ukrainians. Because basically I would say that Zelensky doesn't have this kind of the wide field for maneuver, because it's not Zelensky who dictates Ukraine, it's Ukraine who dictates Zelensky. The recent example, you probably know, remember this summer, Zelensky and his team tried to pursue, to push the kind of the laws that could limit the activity anti-corruption institutions, and has been stopped because there's a large wave of protest throughout Ukraine, throughout large Ukrainian cities, mostly by young people, young Ukrainians, and it made Zelensky stop. So this is something that could be hardly imagined in Russia. So what I'm telling you is that Ukrainian opinion matters very much. There's also another dimension which is very important here, and this is a military dimension. Because after Putin failed with his blitzkrieg, he is very much relying on the war of the attrition. But war attrition is a specific kind of attrition in which public opinion matters, and matters a lot. Basically, yes, without a doubt, what's going in front, it plays a very important role. But in war of attrition, not the less role, probably even more important role, is defined by how long the population or society is willing or ready to carry the burden of the war. Let me remind you that the classic case of the war of attrition is the First World War. And the First World War have not ended in the military fronts. It ended with the collapse of the largest empires that has been engaged in the war, which is the Russian Empire, German Empire, and Austrian Empire. And this collapse has been produced or provoked by the mass opposition movements, mass protests in Petersburg or Berlin or in Vienna. So again, what I'm saying here, that in war like that, what people think plays very important role. It defines largely the results of the war. So we may expect that under current conditions, when Ukrainians enter in the fourth winter, which will be a very harsh winter, a part of this kind of conditions, climate conditions, Ukraine is entering in the triple crisis. The first crisis, a political crisis, which is provoked by this kind of corruption scandal. You may know that led to the kind of political turmoil that Zelensky had to fire Yermak, who was the second most important figure in Ukraine. Any case, it's political crisis. A part of it, there is military crisis because Ukrainians slowly lose some territories in the Eastern Front. And our Russian army, even have huge losses, it still proceeds with taking new territories of Ukraine. And apart, there's economical crisis because nowadays, since Russia focusing on the attacks on the Ukrainian energy sector, there is a blackout, there is problem with heat, and prospects for this war, economical, are not good. So to say, we have this triple crisis. So we may expect that the public mood in Ukraine is getting from bad to worse, and people are becoming more and more pessimistic, probably even depressed. So now the point is, regardless of this kind of the circumstances, or the kind of crisis, Ukrainian society is still very much resilient. And this is the basic message I want to share with you. And this is, I believe, the most important message. Again, I will show you some kind of the data, or describe you some of the data to reveal it, but this is kind of surprise, which a very nice surprise, because again, we may expect that public opinion would be very much disturbed by this kind of prospects, but it's not. Ukrainian society is still very much resilient, and I keep returning because I believe it's very important conclusion that has to be taken account when discussing the possible effects of the possible results of the war. So let me put this way. So I won't go into details, but let me just say that I relying on the very reliable sources. This is the recent survey has been done in Ukraine by one of the more very academic respected social survey institutions. The most important thing that this survey has been done both before the political scandal or after it, so we could compare before the corruption and after corruption scandal. Also, very importantly, it's not about just quantity, about the percentage, how many people responded on what, but also has a focus groups. Focus 10 groups, which could just say what people really mean. And this is very importantly, those both survey cover all of Ukraine, with exception of territory which is occupied by Russian forces. So now let me proceed to the dates, and I will try to be as short as possible. First of all, there's very hard to describe this kind of data in one way. This is basically, you need to have, so to say, two hands. On the one hand, on the other hand. So on the one hand, let me just start. On the one hand, yes, Ukrainians feel the station is getting in wrong direction. And the number of the Ukrainians who believe that stations getting worse is increasing from 58 to 63 before and after corruption scandal, which is a lot. But at the same time, this is surprising. Even so, Ukrainians believe or afraid that situation is getting worse. 75% of them, I underline, 75% of them still believe that in Ukrainian victory. This is something which I believe goes beyond any kind of the expectations. It's very high. Just again, 75% Ukrainians do believe in Ukrainian victory. They continue to believe. What is their concern actually? Could you understand? They're concerned about their relatives and friends on the front. They're concerned about their health and life, because given this kind of blackouts, attack of the Russian drones and rockets. But most of all, they're very much concerned about corruption. And they blame Zelensky personally for this corruption. Not in the sense Zelensky is a kind of take part of this corruption, but that he didn't pay sufficient attention to the corruption that goes on in the higher echelons of power. So this I'm saying here that since because of the case of the corruption, Zelensky is losing his popularity. It has been stated very clearly. And he's also losing trust, society losing trust in him. So let's put it this way, if there will be elections nowadays, presidential elections, most likely Zelensky would lose it to Zaluzhny, and it will be Zaluzhny that the gap would be very large. But even worse so, Zelensky could lose only not to Zaluzhny, but also to Budanov, who is his head of the Secret Service, which is a very, to say, worrisome factor, because basically this also tells you something about the crisis of power. But again, on the other hand, Zelensky popularity still remains to be relatively high. It's 45%. And let me just remind you, it's more or less like a Trump support in the United States. It's much higher than support of the most Western leaders. See it Macron in France, Starmer in Britain, or Merkel Germany, which their level support is between 15 and 20%, and probably so close to Meloni, the leader of Italy. So again, if Zaluzhny or Budanov would not enter the fields of the presidential election, Zelensky still has a strong chance to be re-elected. That said, Ukrainians are not willing for elections because they believe the elections could produce some kind of political crisis, and they don't want to have this kind of political crisis. So they don't believe that elections could be done during the war. Some say that even after the war, it had to take some time to calm down, so to say, to have this kind of elections. So basically, this is they understand the perils and the threats related to this kind of the elections during the war. So they are not supporting this idea. Whatever Trump says about that Ukraine wants to have a peace, it doesn't mean they want to have a peace under any conditions. Yes, by the way, Trump is right, and you probably heard this kind of recent statement. He just quoted that 82% of the Ukrainians won't have peace and also negotiations. By the way, he's quoting directly this surveys that I'm relying to, and I believe he has some success. This kind of another story how he got the success, but basically he is right, but it's only half of truth. Yes, 82% of Ukrainians want to have a peace, but it doesn't mean that they want peace under any conditions. And this is exactly what Trump is not saying. Because basically they want to have a just peace. This is very important for them, and they are not ready to compromise for their territories and sovereignty. They're very strong about that. They're very, explicit. They don't want to have peace under any conditions. They are ready. They understand. They're realistic. They understand they could sacrifice some territories if need be, but only if need be, and also if there is some kind of the compromise from the Russian side as well. They will be ready for compromise, which will be bilateral for both sides, for Ukrainians and Russians as well, not just for Ukrainians. This is something very important when they try to tell it, and they may accept, they may agree on the frozen front line, but again, on the one condition, there will be some guarantees, reliable guarantees. And they expect this have guarantees help from Western countries. Again, they don't trust that much Trump. They don't believe that Trump's plan would work for Ukraine as a guarantees. As a matter of fact, they see Trump as rather predicament for these peace negotiations, rather the kind of the supporting act. And basically, they rely mostly on the European Union, if need be on Turkey, unless, and probably the last actor that they still probably will have is a China, which is kind of the surprising fact. So this is basically say it's a two hands, on the one hand, on the other hand. But there is unanimity when it comes to the kind of the Western orientation, to the foreign orientations or the outside orientations. So basically, what I'm saying here, that there is no doubts about Ukrainians, that Ukrainians have to join the European Union and NATO. This is something which gives a very strong support for Ukraine, because they see it's not just kind of giving, entering in the European zone to have a higher standards of living. They believe that joining European Union and NATO serves as a kind of the security measure. It hasn't to provide some kind of security and guarantees. Only 4%, which is a tiny part, supports that Ukraine should join Russia as a kind of the make an alliance, which is negligent part, so to say. Again, so if we come to the kind of foreign orientation, there is no really doubt here that majority of Ukraine looking west. But again, they don't see the West as a kind of the third solution, as the final solution, because they believe that still they're not sure that West would be ready to support Ukraine in the case it would be. And I still believe that probably the main guarantees is to change Ukraine, to make a very strong state, efficient state, all the kind of things. When it comes to the presidential elections and the president, they may accept a military man as a president, but again, it depends on the longevity and results of the war. If the war ends with the kind of negotiations and the truce, which not could be final or just, then they may expect a new attack of Ukraine of Russia. So in this case, they would accept the figure of military man as a president, because they believe that security is the highest priority. But if this is not the case, they are not willing military president, they have a kind of civic figure which could concentrate on rebuilding Ukraine, on resolving economic and humanitarian issues. Again, what I'm saying here because it's very important, because it gives the idea whether Ukraine is ready for a kind of military solution. Or the kind of sometimes Kremlin always kind of presumes that Ukraine is tilting toward a military junta, which is not the case. And probably the final point is here that when it comes to scenario, the long-term scenarios, how Ukrainians see the future of their country. So basically, there are two scenarios. One is the best scenario, and the other the worst scenario. So the best scenario is that Ukraine would become a very successful development country of European Union with a strong economy, with a strong military army, with a consolidated society based on the patriotic values. So this is their image, best case scenario. And the worst case scenario, which is very pessimistic, that Ukraine becomes a very uncomfortable place to live, that with a very depressing state, corrupted, ruined by the war, with corrupted elites, and many debts, and most of the people, especially young people, ambitious people, would leave the country. So it's kind of stagnating Ukraine. So this is two-case scenario, and most important, again, this is something we want to emphasize. Most Ukrainians still believe in the best case scenario. They are realistic. They don't believe it will come immediately, but they still believe that Ukraine has a chance to become, even on this case, become successful country, and it's regardless the depressing emotions and the kind of fields news that coming both from front and the power. So you may presume that this survey to some extent has been manipulated, and not in the sense that the numbers manipulated, but in the sense that quite often, as those who are engaged in the surveys know, that people provide the answer which they expected to provide. So normalize, or probably they fell victims of the official propaganda. So this is not the case. Let me just reassure it. And the reason I'm saying here, because I keep checking this kind of the surveys and public opinion. I have many friends who travel through the country, especially foreigners, and they do confirm it, that regardless the situation is getting worse during the last year, the public opinion is not getting more pessimistic, more to the contrary. The last year, the situation was the public mood was more pessimistic than it's now. I have a friend of mine who is an Estonian journalist, and he keeps coming to Ukraine every several months. He keeps interviewing me every 100 years. We already will have a 14th surveys. But recently, he traveled throughout the Ukraine for 2 weeks, starting from the Lviv and the vicinity, ended in Kryvyi Rih, then in Sumy. So actually, he covered all Ukraine, including all the territories which was very close to the fronts. And what he assures me, that he didn't find any kind of the pessimism there. And he says that only in one case he come upon personality that says that Ukraine have to give up territories in exchange for peace. And again, this is kind of different. He would talk with different groups of people, both in villages and in cities, and Ukrainian speaking, Russian speaking, doesn't really matter. But he was very much surprised as I talk about this kind of the resilience of Ukrainian society. So the reason I'm telling that if God forbids Ukraine would collapse, and again, God forbids, it would be the society to blame. It would rather to blame an efficient government, Ukraine, and even more an efficient West. It doesn't provide sufficient help for Ukraine in this kind of circumstances. So if I may come to some kind of conclusion here, so this is something which I believe close to the miracle, to surprise. This kind of resilience of Ukrainian society, and there is no kind of the sufficient explanation why Ukrainian society is such a resilient even on the 4th years of the war, of the winter. I may provide some historical explanations because historical studies confirm that society that underwent crisis, political crisis, turmoils, and disasters, they're much resistant toward new disasters, so to say. Like it's like any body, a human body, that once you have a virus and survive it, you are immune to new viruses. This is something which has been confirmed by many studies, which may be expected in case of Ukraine as well. But again, it doesn't cover all the possible explanations. It was just one hypothesis, but it doesn't fit well with what we have realities, because what we have in Ukraine, we have enough generation that has no experience of disaster before the war. It was a generation that has been raised after the collapse of the Soviet Union mostly, which has been raised in the circumstances of the relative well-being until the crisis 2008, and also in the conditions of the relative democracy. To put long story short, they didn't have expected some kind of crisis. And I would say nowadays the generation is coming to power. This is in the middle age. And this is probably the best epitome of this generation with Zelensky himself, Zaluzhny, Budanov, all this Ukrainian society. There's in the age of the 45 plus minus 5. And let me just turn your attention that unlike Ukrainian elites, Russian elites, it's much older. Putin and his closest milieu is 70 plus minus 5. So this is actually two different generations. And if you don't take account this kind of youth revolution in Ukraine, because the young this elite Ukraine becomes younger and younger, you don't understand much. But to put again, what I'm saying here, this generation has no record of the disasters, so it doesn't limit kind of the theory that the society went through disaster much resilient. Does really well with this kind of the Ukrainian conditions, especially given the fact that nowadays this is the generation which runs the country, which is also the age of most of the military troops in Ukraine. So since I believe there is no kind of the rational explanation, we just may speculate here. I would say you probably heard this kind of the famous quote, which is attributed to many thinkers, almost to either to Aristotle or to Voltaire or Hegel, that better is enemy of the good. I would rephrase this kind of the saying that in Ukrainian situation, the bad is the enemy of the worse. In a sense that Ukraine situation is not good, is rather, so to say, very critical, but it's not catastrophical. But basically, Ukraine has no option, because they don't have a kind of sound alternative for this kind of situation, because other alternative is even worse that is now. In a sense that since they are aware of the recent Russian crimes in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, and there is a new news coming every day from the villages and the cities, what Russians do, not just kind of the human beings on the military front, but also civilians, also what do is propriety. So say there is not that much choice, because why you have such a barbaric neighbor that's shown again and again that has no regards over the property, your fundamental rights, your freedom, your right to speak and vote as you like. So this is not the option for Ukrainians. They have to stand. Many Ukrainians feel that that they don't want to be, to say, a large North Korea. Again, this is kind of speculations, but in any case, they believe it pays to stop the aggressor, even at the high price, so the future generations could live as they wish, not as a strolling refugees, but in their own country. So at this moment, on this point, I would like to finish my short presentation. And I would welcome very much your questions and critical comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hrytsak. This was amazing and very passionate. I open panel for the questions. Dr. Deutsch, please open your microphone. Leonard Deutsch is our former graduate dean of Marshall University. Please, Len.
Hi. At the beginning of your talk, you tried to set up a little bit about the history of corruption and dealing with corruption. And you talked about the position that young people take, Was there a conflict between the position that young people took and that the government officially took? Could you clarify that? Happened a few years ago.
Let me know that this is this summer. Again, thank you for the question. It was this summer. It was in the July.
Okay.
And let me just tell you the story. It's publicly understandable as the sequence. So at some point, the corruption institutions, anti-corruption institutions, came very close to the Zelensky milieu, because they started to investigate the milieu, the corruption amongst the kind of the closest colleagues of Zelensky. So at that point, Zelensky decided to accept some kind of laws which would curtail the autonomy of these anti-corruption institutions, to stop it. And it was already practically accepted in Ukrainian parliament since Zelensky has a monopoly, not a majority in the parliament. So this was the story. On the next day, in each large Ukrainian city, including Kyiv, they started improvised mass protest, mostly by young Ukrainians who went to street and to square with a kind of cartoon. This is called Cartoon Maidan, when they were protesting with a kind of jokes, severe jokes against this movement made by Zelensky. And on the same evening, Zelensky stopped the canceled this kind of legislation. So this was the story. They stopped this anti-corruption, and as a result, this corruption proceeded, and it ended with a corruption scandal because they revealed the documents. So I don't know if I could be more clear on that issue. But it says that Ukrainian society has no tolerance to corruption, especially under the war. And the other thing, that civil society matters in Ukraine. That Zelensky could not run the country single-handedly. He had to account the public mood.
Okay, thank you.
More questions, please, or comments.
Victor,
John, please. John Yeager. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor, for the great talk. You mentioned rather briefly the countries that would support Ukraine, and I think it was in the context of security measures, and you said the European Union, possibly Turkey, and then you mentioned a third country, and I didn't hear the third country.
China, unexpectedly. But on the global support, but still, even so, China. This was your question?
John? I'm sorry, your microphone is...
Yeah, I accidentally hit my speaker off, not my... Could you repeat the answer? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
The third country was China.
Okay.
But it was on much lower percent than European Union and Turkey. European Union, 80%, Turkey, 50%, and China, 20%. This is the hierarchy.
Well, I thought you said China, and I guess that's what got my attention, because from a U.S. perspective, China seems to be supporting our friend, Mr. Putin, but maybe you can clarify that.
It doesn't mean to say that Ukrainians trust China. What they mean to say that China has a leverage to have a pressure on Putin.
Thank you. Thank you. More comments and questions, please. Raise a hand. Grigory Yablonsky, our friend from St. Louis. Grisha, please. Unmute yourself and open your camera.
Just open. Dr. Hrytsak, I'm very okay, but I'm very thankful for your presentation, especially in English, because it's very important for English audience to listen real witness, you know. And я щиро дякую вам.
Дуже дякую вам за ваші добрі слова. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Це правда. Ви насправді американці не розуміють, що навіть українського походження насправді що відбувається. Дуже вдячні вам за цю розмову.
Я дуже дякую вам за ваші теплі слова. Дуже дякую, не заслужили, що не приємно. I just thank him for the kind words that has been said to by Mr. Yablonsky and I believe his wife. Thank you so much.
Yeah, just
Sister. It's sister from Kyiv.
I'm
Oh,
from
you're
Kyiv.
from Kyiv. I'm sorry, I didn't know
Я
that.
працювала у містера Глузу багато років і товаришую з Мирославом Мариновичем. Він нас колись познайомив.
То я дуже хотів би зустрітися по нагоді з вами в Києві, якщо буде це така нагода. Або якщо ви будете у Львові, то прошу вас на каву.
Таке ж в Америці.
Dr. Hrytsak, what about Ukrainian culture now, state of art? Tell something.
Oh, this is a risk of a new long talk.
Mhm. Just briefly.
Yeah, but I try to be very brief, if I may. I believe that what we have now, it's a kind of the eruption, if I may say so, of Ukrainian culture, which is also very much remarkably surprisingly, because under the war you may expect something very much differently. But nowadays, there is so many new novels, poetry, new authors, especially young authors, especially theater activity. It's very hard to buy a ticket nowadays in any theater, especially in the young theaters. Music, actually. Let me put this way, you probably know the name of the rather famous Russian writer, Boris Akunin.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and he made a very nice comparison recently. He says that since he knows Russian culture very well and he's very much interested in Ukrainian culture, he has a kind of the feeling that Russian culture is on decline, while Ukrainian culture is on the and this is a crucial difference.
Yeah.
And I believe to a large extent the Ukrainian resilience also explains by the fact of Ukrainian culture.
Very
What's
good.
going on nowadays.
Very good.
Because
Yeah.
basically I believe what is kind of Ukrainian resistance, another dimension of resistance, is to provide a kind of keep some kind of normality.
Yeah, and people
And
believe in
normality is
future.
continue with the culture production, culture activity. It's
And
everywhere.
and people believe in the future. People believe.
Yes, because actually I do believe in future, but what I tried to say, I was quoting the results of the survey. So yes,
Mhm.
they do. They
Yeah.
do.
Thank you again. Thanks.
Thank you.
And if I could just jump in here really quickly at the very beginning. First of all, I would like to point out that Mr. Yablonsky is from the Kyiv Polytechnic Institute, an alma mater for him, and is an expert in chemical engineering and kinetics. I want to point out the importance of how the very beginning of that conversation, and welcome to your sister visiting from Kyiv. May you have a safe and wonderful time here in the United States. What the comment was thank you for saying these things in English, because Ukrainians know these things and talk about these things between themselves all the time. But Mr. Yablonsky was pointing out the value of Professor Hrytsak's speaking in English so that this information can be accessible to decision makers and people in positions to help Ukraine. And that is actually very much the mission of MUkraine as a program. We are in West Virginia. We're very lucky because we know our elected officials. And even though we are a small state with almost zero Ukrainian population, we still have senators and we still have representatives in Congress. And they do listen to this kind of information. So I would just like to stress, to emphasize the value of that. I don't know if it's Dr. Yablonsky or Mr. Yablonsky. I hope I'm using the correct title, but I just wanted to emphasize the value of what you said at the very beginning. The fact that Professor Hrytsak is knowledgeable and expert in this area and is able to speak about this so articulately, so well in such detail in English, where it will make a difference. So дуже вам всім дякую.
Thank you for the compliments. As I said, every compliment has a small grain of truth, and thank you for the small grain. It suits my ego, let's put it this way. But my message is very simple and clear. Don't expect Ukraine to collapse. Ukrainian society is resilient.
Thank you. This is absolutely great to hear. And as people are thinking, one inevitable question, which I have myself, meanwhile, what about Europe, especially Eastern Europe? We see very different positions, very changing landscape in Czech Republic, in Poland, not even mentioning Hungary and Slovakia. So what do you have any idea on how these things have changed? Because everything seems in flux every day.
So I couldn't comment on Hungary and Slovakia, and I believe it doesn't make sense to comment on that because the situation is relatively clear there. And I don't, there may be some changes, but I don't hope that much. I like the small possibility of the changes. Station Czech Republic is a 50-50, and I would say in Poland station is more optimistic, because still the majority of Poland's they support the Ukrainians. Even so, there is a very strong anti-Ukrainian sentiment, and it's growing. But still I would say stations is more or less under control. But what is the common denominator in all these countries? They don't want to talk and listen about the war. They say that this is the kind of the word which is forbidden, which starts with the letter W, Vina. They are afraid of such possibilities because they understand they are not ready for them. This is the clear message. And in this sense, there is a common understandable that Ukraine is a sense of security is their security, because Ukraine keeps the front. Again, as I said, ironically, there is much stronger feeling about that in Baltic countries and Scandinavian countries, especially in Finland and Sweden. They are very, very much supportive. There is no kind of there's no kind of the discussion about that. Also, Netherlands and Belgium, also Germany, to some extent France, and very much Great Britain. We are much concerned about, so to say, southern part of Europe, which is Italy, when situation is 50-50, more so about Romania, Greece, all the kind of countries. So what I'm saying here, this is probably by speculation and probably too much of generalization, but I would say in the case of this war, the main dividing line nowadays is north-south, which is north is very supportive of Ukraine, and less, I wouldn't say they are Russian, but they're much less supportive of Ukraine. And again, the crucial issue is that Ukrainian is buying time for Europe, whether Europe has a chance or political will to come with reforms. And here I'm rather skeptical what they perceive. But again, it takes time. It's a probably take another lecture. You have to invite somebody else who could tell him all the kind of things. So to say, situation is very much unclear. But it's unclear, more on pessimistic rather optimistic rather than pessimistic side.
Thank you very much. I give microphone now to our co-host Anara. Anara, please. You have your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much for your excellent and very comprehensive introduction and analysis. And that the current, I agree with you when you compare the World War I and situation now, what is happening, and the current war actually reveals the aggression of Russia and other post-Soviet countries. So there are deep-seated issues related to Georgia, Moldova, then North Caucasus. And I hope that after victory of Ukraine, what might be in this region, how Ukraine may actually, as a flagman, contribute to their peace, to peace in this region and justice. Thank you.
So this is my very much subjective opinion, but this is opinion which is shared by many of my colleagues and experts. You couldn't expect peace as long as Putin in power. That's period. That's what. The attitude of Putin toward Ukraine could be defined by one word, and the one word only, it's obsession. And it's very much irrational. So don't expect this war to end by Putin's power.
I mean that, yeah, I know, but anyway, that actually even Putin is not there. The whole ideology of Russian domination in not only in Ukraine but in all neighboring countries is still alive.
What I'm trying to say, that a lot depends on possibility of victory of Ukraine. But the key issue, we have to redefine what the victory may be. This is what I'm trying to answer, because we did believe the very long, unrealistically, that this war would end with the collapse of Russia, or rather the kind of the military parade in Kremlin, or that we will drink coffee in Crimea. It won't happen, because it's not about military effect that much. I would just turn your attention that this summer, the former Minister of Defense, Andriy Zagorodnyuk, put a very nice article on the foreign affairs when he redefined Ukrainian victory. And if I put it briefly, it's called strategic neutralization of Russia, which means that war could drag on, but Russia couldn't achieve any strategical aim of this war. It's exactly what happened in Black Sea. You probably remember that in the Black Sea, Russia has a large military fleet, but could do anything because it's neutralized by Ukrainian drones. So what he says, the same thing could be done in the air, on the land, all the kind of things. And this is a new strategy. And if I may say so again, it's probably to go too far, but he kind of compares with the situation in Israel. I don't go to the Gaza again because it's very sensitive. What we says basically, it's kind of situation like Israel, because Israel has a kind of the neighboring enemy which wants to destroy the country. And they have a kind of the permanent war, but they already won the war, even the war still going on. So this is kind of the definition. If this would succeed, if this will continue, I have no doubt that Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and even probably Belarus would embark on quite different trajectory. Because once you could see that Putin is neutralized and he couldn't achieve nothing, it would have a huge effect on the neighboring countries. But basically, again, it's very much defined on what was going on in Ukraine during the war on this territory and things like that. I'm sorry that I have this very long answer.
No, that's very interesting what you're thinking. I just wanted to ask that I'll add that many analysts now talk about and they believe that months or weeks of Putin are numbered. And that's why it's already time to discuss what might be after Putin. That's why I'm asking about role of Ukraine in the new situation quite soon, maybe next year.
I wish you were true. You wish you were right. I'm not that much optimistic in this case. Unfortunately, I believe that we have to be ready for a longer war. According to some kind of estimations, that given the resources that Putin possesses, he could still continue war for the next 3-5 years, if nothing happened.
Yeah, what if he is not actually there? What might be the situation without Putin, say? Do you have another scenario?
If I may provide some kind of the analogy here, it's like what happened after the death of Stalin. So you could expect some kind of liberalization of Russia. Again, I won't say that Russians would have a better attitude toward Ukrainians. This would be not most likely. But again, I believe that they could not continue the war like that, this kind of full-scale war. Because in many senses, I believe, again, this is my point, this is very much personal war of Ukraine, personal war of Putin, because of his obsession. If he will be smarter, luckily he is not, he could get much more in Ukraine in different ways, but he is not, so to say. So again, I expect some kind of liberalization of after his what happened to his death or whatever kind of the political failure. I don't know what happened there. I couldn't count on that on the short term, but I don't believe this kind of his regime has a long life. I would tell you, just probably to finish, I just heard the shortest Russian joke. And this is said, "Будущее России," future of Russia. I believe what Putin did, he denied any future for Russia, any kind of the good scenario. Ukraine has a good scenario, Russia has none. This is the crucial difference.
Thank you very much. This is a very perfect finale, very perfect ending of this fascinating presentation. And we all thank Dr. Hrytsak for his sharing with us this news, especially of the direct sociological survey of Ukraine. Dr. Hrytsak, a couple of final words from you, please, to our viewers.
Again, I'm very thankful and gratitude for what you're doing and having me here. Keep doing that. We very much estimate your set. We very much appreciate your support attitude, and let's keep together. Let's prevail. We will prevail. We will prevail. It will take a long time, without a doubt. Unfortunately, it will take much suffering and victims. But in long term, as a historian, I'm rather optimistic.
Thank you for your optimism and your wisdom. Dr. Shrey, please.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Дякую.
Героям слава!
Слава. Дуже дякую.